Tonight on Newshour, as President Trump enjoys widespread praise for securing a peace deal, back in Washington, things are, well, at a standstill. 9 days now into the US government shutdown, and what many in America brushed off as political theatre has become a genuine crisis. At midnight on October the 1st, the federal government ran out of funding after Congress failed to pass a spending bill, a scenario so common it barely made headlines at all. But this time is different. Nearly 900,000 federal workers have been furloughed. Essential agencies like the CDC, the National Institute of Health and the FDA, they're all scaling back critical work, and national parks and museums also remain closed nationwide. Well, economic data releases are also frozen, housing loans delayed, and food assistance programs are just days away from running dry. Even the National Nuclear Security Administration warns it can only operate at full capacity until October the 10th. Flights continue, but staff shortages are also spreading across the FAA and TSA. The ripple effect is now hitting businesses, families, and global markets. So why did America see this coming and still let it happen? And what does it reveal about a system that seems unable to govern itself? Well, first, let's take a look at what seems to be the main sticking point between Republicans and Democrats.
The Republican-led Senate has repeatedly failed to pass rival measures to fund federal agencies, keeping the US government in shutdown. There has been insufficient support for a Republican proposal to finance operations temporarily, and a Democratic version seeking to extend key healthcare subsidies also failed to advance. President Donald Trump has publicly signaled openness to a potential deal on the subsidies, which help about 24 million Americans purchase insurance through the Affordable Care Act, legislation long opposed by Republicans. However, he has also said the shutdown must first end before any bipartisan discussions on healthcare policy can begin. The subsidies have become the central demand of Democrats and the primary reason they have voted against the Republican plan. During the early days of the shutdown, the administration cut certain federal funds to Democratic-led states and cities. Trump claimed government employees were being laid off, though aides later clarified he was referring to those furloughed after funding lapsed. Communication between the two sides has been sporadic. While the White House insists talks are ongoing, Democratic leaders dispute that, and the House has remained adjourned as roughly $1.7 trillion in agency funding, about 1/4 of annual federal spending, remains frozen.
Okay, joining me now to discuss this in more detail is Newsweek's Peter Roff, the political analyst who joins us from Washington, DC. Peter, as always, great to see you. 9 days on then, Peter. Why has this shutdown gone from a sort of straightforward political ritual into a genuine national crisis?
Good evening. Good to be with you. I'm not sure I can agree that it's a genuine national crisis because that's always part of the rhetoric. I think that one thing that people need to understand is that the fact the government shut down doesn't mean that the Nimitz is in dry dock, the Air Force has been sent home, and nobody's getting their Social Security checks. The president has broad discretion to determine what employees and programs are essential and keep them going, and the people who work there are working without pay.
Is there a sense...
Those things that have...
Peter, sorry to interrupt.
I was going to say those things.
Is there a sense in which you think that the president might welcome this if his discretionary authority is honed, focused, perhaps, you know...
I do.
Yeah.
I do think he welcomes this. It's an opportunity to identify things the government does that America can get along without in an era where we have we're starting to have better growth numbers. The last 2 quarters have both beaten the predictions, and I think second quarter was 3.8%, which we have not seen for a long time. But we need to cut down on the size of government as we're growing the economy to get the debt back to a manageable level of percentage of gross domestic product. So this may identify some things we can do without, but it also heightens the president's executive authority. And one of the themes of the second Trump administration has been an aggressive effort to reestablish or even just establish presidential authority that Trump and his team think the president, any president, should have. Authority that has either eroded to Congress or been shifted away from the executive by 50 years, 75 years of court decisions going back to the Warren Court, which started under President Eisenhower, which in fact sustained many decisions, many opinions that weaken the power of the president. So Trump's trying to grab that power back. Also, remember that America's major political parties are coalitions. We form our coalitions before elections rather than after because we don't have a multi-party system. And the pro-government party is the Democrats. The anti-government party, the party for less government, are the Republicans. And so the Republicans are less likely to be nervous about a shutdown because it furthers their public policy goals.
And Peter, obviously there are different ideological points of view on this, different political perspectives. But do you think to some degree it's easier for folk on Capitol Hill to talk about these things conceptually, you know, when they themselves are not looking for food assistance programs, when they themselves perhaps aren't reliant on getting that housing loan in place on time? Is there any sense here, you think, in which that actually mainstream, you know, Main Street, real families on lower incomes, irrespective of which way you vote, actually might be the ones that are suffering the most from this this delay?
When government services are reduced, it's axiomatic that people who rely more on government services will be more effective. And so there is certainly truth in what you're saying, and this isn't being done to hurt them. The principal objection now, and it really is the Democrats who have the government shut down, because while majority rules in the House and Senate, you can, an individual senator, let alone a block of senators, can stop something from moving forward unless 60 of their colleagues will agree to overcome their objection and move the business of the Senate ahead. Chuck Schumer has enough Democrats voting with him to prevent a majority of the Senate from passing this legislation and sending it to the president's desk. And what they're objecting to now is something that they voted for 13 times previously. This is political theater. They are trying to extend the emergency subsidies for health insurance, for Medicaid, which is Medicare, which is to provide health coverage for not health care, but health coverage for the poor and the indigent. That's what the program does. Under Obamacare, that program was expanded so more people could get in it. The numbers that I've seen have said that out of the 34 million people who are eligible, legally eligible to participate in Medicaid, there are 39 million subscribers. The Republicans point to that as an example of waste, fraud, and corruption, and that cutting the subsidies will help reduce that waste, fraud, and corruption, and get people off of Medicaid who shouldn't be there in the first place, putting the program in jeopardy for the people who need it. The Democrats see this as an attack on the poor, see this as an attack on their voters, and are depending on those voters to stick with them in the upcoming congressional elections, which look to be a dead heat as we determine who will control Congress for the second half of the second Trump presidency.
Yeah, it's interesting, Peter. One of the features I think that we've all seen from the normalization of these shutdowns is that there is inevitably politicking opportunism on both sides. Very difficult to figure out who is more to blame. You know, which side is actually being less sincere, if you like, in these negotiations to get things unstuck. Nevertheless, is it possible, with the perspective that you've got and the knowledge you've got of what's happening in Washington, to get a sense of who is most responsible at the moment for keeping things in this shutdown situation?
Well, I would say at this point, I would blame the Democrats who are arguing to preserve emergency spending that was statutorily set to expire. Republicans agreed to this spending back during COVID when the economy was locked down and people couldn't go to work. People would get arrested if they tried to go to work in some states. They needed help paying their health insurance. So Republicans agreed to temporary subsidies. The Democrats are now trying to extend what was supposed to be temporary, to extend things that were agreed upon to be ended. I think that's an end run at the last minute around an agreement. And I think the Republicans are entirely justified in objecting to both the process and the cost of extending these subsidies.
Okay, Peter. Sorry to interrupt. We've seen many of these situations before, similar arguments on both sides. But I just wanted to get to the heart of what might be different this time. Of course, the behaviour has become normalised. We're all quite used to the theatre. But we now have Trump in his second term. We have all sorts of geopolitical tectonic plates moving around the world. What's different this time? What do the legislators need to consider? What does the president perhaps need to consider doing this time that previously he didn't?
Well, I think what's different about this shutdown, number one, is that Trump's party has control has a majority in both chambers of Congress. And so they can get something done if they can get past the filibuster. The second thing that's different is that the Democrats' approval numbers are at historic lows. The people have not rallied to the Democrats, even in their opposition to Trump. Mm-hmm. And simply not being Trump no longer seems to be enough to win the battle. There has been a shift to where the Republicans are now the party of working Americans and the Democrats are the party of the American elite, the people who graduate from the best schools, have postgraduate degrees, and have the most high-paying jobs. That's a different strategy now. That requires a different strategy. The Republicans have shifted, the Democrats haven't. But the most important thing is that Donald Trump's tolerance for political risk is higher than any president in my lifetime. He is almost impervious to risk. And you can see that in the way that he conducted himself through his personal legal difficulties over the 4 years he was out of office. Every charge that was thrown at him was pushed back against aggressively, almost with a kind of, okay, fine, bring it on. I know I didn't do anything wrong. This is all politics, bring it on. There was no hesitation, no mealy-mouthing, no waffling. He just Trump comes up to his opponents and just gets right in their face. And he has a tolerance for risk. And if people are telling him, Mr. President, your numbers are suffering, Mr. President, the party is losing support, we have to cut a deal, he'll say, well, let's just wait a couple of days and see where things go.
The president...
Most presidents...
Sorry, Peter.
Most presidents see that as a cue to go to the negotiating table, not Donald Trump.
Yeah, you're right. He is extraordinarily different, as you say. This incredible tolerance for personal risk. It's a tolerance for personal risk that you could argue that everyday families in America themselves don't share with the president. You know, when you think about the middle class communities in America that may be affected by this shutdown, what are they feeling and thinking at the moment? You mentioned the mobilization, if you like, on the Democrat side is not as strong and vociferous as could be expected. Is there a sense of apathy almost amongst everyday families?
I wouldn't call it apathy as much as I would call it fatigue and frustration. The Biden years were very bad economically. Biden in 4 years destroyed 40 years of relative price stability. America is still reacting to sticker shock, even though inflation is back where it was. Money is again stable. That huge leap that prices took over the last 4 years, that's going to take a long time to work its way out. You're going to need growth. You're going to need productivity gains in efficiency. I think it was Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan Chase says he now believes that AI is now generating as much money as has been invested in it, and those investments have been in the billions and trillions of dollars. The president has brought multi-billion-dollar trade deals back to the United States. And so we're going to see economic growth over the next few quarters. I'm hoping that because the tax cuts and the expensing and the other pro-growth initiatives in the One Big Beautiful Bill take effect immediately, that we're going to have really strong growth in July and August of 2026 as people begin to focus on the 2026 elections. And the discomfort they feel now during the shutdown will be forgotten. I think that's probably what the president's thinking is.
Well, Peter, one of the prerequisites that many economists talk about when it comes to getting this sustainable growth is stability. I want to talk to you more about that. But before I do, let's just take a quick look at a clip here from a press statement that was made by Randy Irwin, National President of the National Federation of Federal Employees.
Now, the law is very clear. This administration has no new authority to engage in mass layoffs because of a government shutdown. This means that the administration is doing one of two things. Either they intend to violate the law, okay, and when the president violates the law, he's violating the Constitution. We are in a dangerous spot in this country when the president thinks that he can just, ignore laws that are written in plain English. That law that you must give back pay to federal employees, okay, that is written in plain English, and he's just telling the American people that he's going to ignore it, okay? Nobody, I don't care who you are, I don't care what side of the aisle on, it doesn't matter. You got a Constitution, you got to faithfully execute the Constitution, and he's ignoring it. Yeah. And so both parties and every American should be furious with the threats that this president is making to federal employees in this country. Okay? So Congress, do your damn job. Yeah.
Very clear. Peter, that's either a very, very shiny suit or the umbrella is perhaps not doing the job that it was designed to do.
But isn't it a nice touch? Press conference in the rain to heighten the drama of the image.
I mean, yeah, rain-based metaphors aside, of which there are plenty, I'm sure we could choose from. Let's talk about this serious issue, though, of stability. What do you think this situation now says about America's political system? We can see the passion on both sides. Is something broken here?
No, nothing's broken. Look, the president of a federal employee union arguing incorrectly about federal workers' access to back pay after a shutdown if they've been sent home as non-essential. You can change that with a single line in whatever piece of legislation you pass to reopen the government. There's nothing about violating the Constitution here. You can simply say, and people who were furloughed as non-essential shall not receive pay for the time they weren't working. Boom, passes Congress, the president signs it. It's law. You can change it at any time. The only section of the union movement in America that's growing, and this has been consistent over the last 30 years, has been state, federal, and local government employees. And most people, when they interact with those employees, it's a TSA agent who's groping them at the airport, or it's an OSHA inspector who's coming in and levying fines because he doesn't like the way they have their warehouse set up, or it's the IRS auditing them, or it's the FBI knocking on their door. You know, the federal government employees who interact with the public. And I just went through this the other weekend, going through what was supposed to be the fast line at the airport coming back from an international trip, and it wasn't moving. And I asked somebody, what's the holdup? Next thing I knew, I had a Customs and Border Patrol guy tapping on my shoulder, asking to see my passport and reminding me that global, whatever the program is called, is a privilege. And I said, yeah, it's a privilege I pay a couple of $100 for, because I don't have to wait in the line like I'm waiting for now. It's like I'm supposed to just accept the reality of the slowdown, and I'm not allowed to complain about the bad service. That's how federal government employees interact with ordinary voters in the United States. And so this guy's not going to get a lot of sympathy, except from his union members, but that's who he's talking to. But as far as political stability goes, look, the founders intended for there to be tensions between the Congress and the president and the judiciary and the federal government and the states. Tension slows down the work of government. That helps protect individual liberty, and it's a safeguard against tyranny. And it is entirely useful, in my judgment, to test those checks and balances every once in a while, to not have things just humming along like a well-oiled machine, because that means something's wrong. It actually means that something's wrong, that the branches of government are not, which represent competing interests, are not representing their interests correctly. They're representing their own interests against the interests of the people. That's the way I see it. As far as, you know, the protests and the demonstrations and the anti-Trump movements and all the other things that have been going on, you know, for a country of 300 million people, we have surprisingly little political violence, which is why it's so shocking when it occurs. Why the murder of Charlie Kirk a month ago was so shocking to people, because it is so rare. It is so rare in the United States for those kinds of things to happen. There are people who have increased their advocacy of violence, but they are on the fringe, on the left and on the right. We have a very strong, stable system. We haven't missed an election. You know, we haven't missed an election, and the Democrats' complaints about some of the challenges that Trump made after losing the presidency in 2024 were dramatically hyped for political purposes. For example, the conversation about so-called fake electors, which we don't have to get into right now because we could talk about it for an hour, and we'd only scratch the surface. But in fact, it was not only legal, but in some readings of the law required that the alternate slates of electors be chosen if there was going to be a contest for the outcome of who won a particular state. All that's in the system, and it all works. The fact that it's being tested doesn't mean the system isn't working. The system doesn't work when it fails the test, and it hasn't failed the test. You know, you may not have approved of Trump's complaints about 2024. I think, frankly, I give him a little bit more credit for being more right than wrong, but I don't think they had the vast kinds of fraud that they had. But Biden was inaugurated anyway. There was one president. There was never any debate about that. The system worked.
The system works, Peter. You're quite right. And it's true to say that by and large, markets have been broadly with the president on many, many issues. Nevertheless, there must be a limit to this. You talk about the tests. You talk about the necessary tension as a guard almost against tyranny. Very coherent arguments. But do you ever worry that global confidence, global markets might at some point start to get nervous if this shutdown, if this tension continues and possibly even increases?
What I worry about is the potential for the BRICS countries to exploit the shutdown as an argument that America's dollar should no longer be the global reserve currency, and that there ought to be something else because the American system is imperiled. I don't think, obviously, that that's true, but I think the BRICS nations could make that argument, and there are certain global leaders who would embrace it as a way to put the United States in its place.
Well, Peter, that's a dramatic point to end on. We always love getting your analysis, hearing your points of view. Thank you, as always, for joining us from Washington.
Always enjoy being on your show. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Peter. Okay, 9 days then in America's shutdown is no longer routine. It's a reckoning, a test, as we've just heard, not just of political will, but of institutional strength. As vital services stall and public trust erodes, Washington faces a deeper question. Can a divided system still deliver? Well, that is all for this edition of Newshour. From all of us here at Anewz, thanks for being with us.